welcome to Psychology Ninjas. Today it's the turn of social learning theory from learning theories. This may also appear when we're talking about criminal psychology and social explanations for criminal behaviour. For the purpose of paper 1 though, this is sitting in learning theories. So, to access your AO1 marks or your explanation and knowledge marks, this is a theory, it's in the title, and so we're looking at key terms associated with that theory. This will break down into the following 4 key terms to access our 4 AO1 marks. We need to give some description of them rather than just identifying them. So it's important when we talk about observational learning that this is the process of modelling and imitation. Also really important here when you're talking about role models, that role models are people or people who become role models have power and status, and that is important in order to aid that imitation process. There are other reasons why we might imitate a specific model, and that's talking about identification. Specifically here, we're thinking about gender. If someone is the same gender as us, we're more likely to identify with them and imitate their behaviour. Hence Bandura's findings from 1961 study. We also want to talk about reinforcement, and this is done vicariously. This is the reward and punishment of other people, but it's still impacting our behaviour. We can also talk about the process here, that attention is paid to models, that we retain that information, we store those behaviours in our schemas, we reproduce them, so therefore we're seeing this imitation. And really important here that we talk about motivation. Being identified with a model is a clear motivator. And this is why social learning theory is different from our other theories in learning theories. Also important here, you could talk about mediational processes, and this is when we're talking about the retention of those certain behaviours, and this might explain why some of the behaviours that are imitated are not a direct imitation of what's been modelled. So we've stored how to be aggressive, but actually how we've then shown that aggression might be slightly different. So when we're thinking about evaluation, we're still on that thing where this is a theory, and therefore we're using SODA as our approach to ensure that we have a broad range of evaluation. It's really important here that we develop our points, and we might do that through additional pieces of research in order to extend what we're saying in our elaborate. Alternatively, we can counter it, giving a counter argument and showing those logical chains of reasoning. So if we're thinking about this 8 marker, we've got the command word evaluate, which means we need to be balanced between our assessment objectives, our explanation and evaluation, but we also want to balance between our strengths and our weaknesses. So we'd start off by talking about observational learning, the process of learning through other people, and then we develop that through research support. Here we could use any of the Bandura studies, but we've gone for 1961. It's really important here that you're just talking about findings rather than that process. And we've extended that, we've elaborated that with a different piece of research, and here we're talking about animal studies, Nicole and Pope, and chickens who were taught to peck and therefore became educated chickens. Higher status chickens were more likely to be imitated. We've got external reliability here, consistency in our findings, that observational learning or learning through other people is occurring. You then move on through and talk about role models. Again, we said, why is someone a role model? What makes someone more likely to be imitated? Really important here. We can talk about social learning theory lacking accuracy in that it ignores other explanations. Specifically here, we're talking about Kendler et al. And using our example of monozygotic and dizygotic twins, and this having a genetic influence on aggression, not just learning socially. However, we want to be really clear here that Bandura did not ignore biological factors. He said that actually this is part of the urge to be aggressive. However, how it is shown is socially dictated. Here we can have our interactionist approach is needed as our mini conclusion, that actually we need to consider both social and non-social explanations for behaviour. We'd then move through and talk about vicarious reinforcement, and that this is an incomplete explanation, that it focuses mainly on modelling and ignores other factors. Again, we're going for a counter-argument here, and you could interchange this counter-argument with the previous one. That Bandura, through the processes of learning, acknowledges both biological and cognitive explanations, which is again much better than classical and operant conditioning, so is the most holistic of our 3 explanations. Finally, we talk about the process, and here it's time for application. We can use lots of different examples here. We've gone for Columbine High School Massacre, and that when the perpetrators were convicted, the video game Doom was something that was also included. However, you could talk about James Bulger case and Child's Play 3 again being associated with what they did. We're going to extend that further by talking about the Sabido method. Here we're saying that we can have telenovelas and topical issues in television dramas in order to publicise issues and change how we're viewing them. All of this gives us credibility. Let's have a look at some exam questions now. We've got a 4-marker here. We've got an explain question, which is asking us to develop and have both an identification and a justification. Here we're focusing on strengths of social learning theory, but we've got to be a little bit careful because this is a STEM-based question. And so our explanation of that strength needs to be in context of Anzo and dogs in order to access that identification mark. Your justification mark doesn't necessarily have to be included or have that context, but it might be more helpful to secure it. Let's have a look at another exam question. Here we've got an 8-marker and we've seen this STEM in other videos. We've got discuss, and with a discuss question we are explaining and applying. There is no need to evaluate here nor necessarily present any research. We want to be using social learning theory for this situation. So we've got to say how the concepts of social learning theory would help Gloria get George to eat more vegetables. Thanks for listening today. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that bell.